So hello, everyone. The Rojava Center for Strategic Studies wants to welcome the future of the Kurdish issue in the complexities, key challenges, and solutions. We want to especially welcome our guests today, Mr. Dêvid Filips, the Director of the Peace Building and Human Rights Program at Columbia University's Institute of Human Rights, and Mr. Taha Ali Ahmed, researcher in Middle East studies. The Kurdish people have suffered and are still suffering tragedies and calamities at the hands of successive governments since World War I. Their homeland, Kurdistan, was divided into four parts between the countries Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria by the Allies through the unjust Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. This led to a phase of denial, racial discrimination, and forced assimilation. And despite the Treaty of Sèvres recognizing Kurdish rights, it unfortunately remained ink on paper. Kurdish uprisings, despite being numerous, were unsuccessful and brutally suppressed, resulting in hundreds of thousands of people killed and millions of displaced. The Kurdish issue has policies of persecution, ethnic cleansing, national assimilation, and genocide, as well as the worst forms of violence and oppression at the hands of the states of Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. In short, we can prove to the world the similarity of the Kurdish people. The leaders of these countries in the last 2 decades are similar to their predecessors in how they practice repression and tyranny against the Kurdish people. Turkey, like Iraq, Iran, and Syria, has tried to assimilate and socially, culturally, economically, and politically fight the Kurdish community, in addition to conducting an intelligence war and coordinating efforts between the various states against the Kurds. However, Kurdish heritage has been able, to a large extent, especially in the last 4 decades, stand against these attempts. This heritage has been instrumental in bringing the Kurdish issue back to the forefront. We're going to begin with the topic of the American and general Western stance towards the Kurdish issue in general, as well as how these relations and views have been impacted by the Turkish attacks against North and East Syria in particular. So it is well known that the political situation in the Middle East has become critically complicated. Various violations and countries involved in the Kurdish issue are practicing policies of denial, of eradication, and of identity erasure against the Kurdish people. So my first question is for Mr. Dêvid Filips. Many people are wondering what the general Western, but specifically and especially American position towards the Kurdish issue is in light of the current crises that are sweeping the region.
Coalition. And what we're seeing now in the Middle East is a manifestation of that. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but it's important for the US to realize that it doesn't have many friends in the world. Kurds are among its best friends. So upholding Kurdish interests, especially their national aspect, countering human rights violations, is critical, not only to the Kurds, but also to US interests, so that we can work together more effectively in pursuit of our common goals.
Thank you, Mr. Filips. The second question is regarding the nation states, which were formed following the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and when the Middle East was divided up by the various victorious powers. These who bring about a decent, dignified life, and the governments of these states today coordinate with each other to prolong their lives as authoritarian states, as dictatorships. And we've seen various examples of this in Syria. We've seen Russia and Iran intervene to prevent the fall of the Syrian regime. We've seen Turkey has the Syrian opposition quite strongly against Assad. Erdogan was calling for,
and now we see
Assad's removal, and now we see that it's trying to reconcile with the Syrian regime. So this question is also from Mr. Phillips. In light of the conflict that's taking place between international and regional powers, do you believe that we will witness a change in governance systems and the organization of the Middle East, especially after the events that are unfolding in Gaza?
So this question should be in historical context. The story of the Kurds, both peril and opportunity, begins in January of 1918 with President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, in which he promised, quote, secure sovereignty and unmolested opportunity for autonomous development to the Kurdish people. He addressed the U.S. Congress. Wilson said, peoples are not to be bartered from sovereignty to sovereignty as if they were chattels and pawns in a great game. Every territorial settlement must be made in the interests of populations concerned. Now, we know that Wilson's words were merely aspirational. On August 10th of 1920, Ottoman Empire, it was rejected by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who denounced Sèvres and launched a war of independence. National Oath and the National Pact set the stage for the Treaty of Lausanne, which made no mention of Kurds or Kurdistan. These lead to the details, but Kurdish identity and is disallowed. This Siverek and the Hilvan rebellions of 1977 set the stage for the emergence of the PKK the following year. Likewise, in Iraq, the second betrayal of Kurds occurred in 1975, maritime boundary, conditioned on Iran's withdrawal of support for Mullah Mustafa Barzani and Iraqi Kurds. We know that the events that unfolded after were tragic. The Anfal campaign, in which more than 5,000 people died in Halabja, and also the forced displacement of many millions of Kurds, was all part of the Arabization plan pursued by the Ba'ath Party and Saddam Hussein. The third betrayal occurred when President George H.W. Bush called on Kurds in Iraq to rise up against Saddam Hussein's regime. The Kurdish revolt was again brutally put down. The Kurds received assistance from the United States. The fourth betrayal occurred in October of 2019 between based on it's your problem, we don't want to deal with it. He was denounced the move, the biggest blunder of the Trump presidency. Representative Liz Cheney called it a shameful disaster. And Mitch McConnell warned that the sudden withdrawal of U.S. forces would only benefit Russia, Iran, and the Assad regime. The fourth betrayal was the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Rojava, abandoning Syrian Kurds, Turkey's aggression. So the history of the Kurds is one of betrayal and abuse. It's important to see the current events and current relations in this context. Kurds have been repeatedly abused by the international community, especially by the states in which they reside. This has rendered the Kurdish issue a concern of minority rights rather than a concern about self-determination.
In light of that, do you believe that this approach could potentially change now with current events, or do you see it continuing down this path of continuous betrayal?
Here, the event surrounding the Middle East region. Kurds have a natural affinity with the Palestinian people. both Kurds in Turkey and in Syria have had their, as have the Palestinian people. But there's a very important distinction here that I'd like to make. The PKK arose the limit of national nation base in Turkey for Kurds to express themselves. So they turned to armed rebellion as a way of forcing negotiations. In contrast to that, the Palestinian people are very poorly represented by Hamas. Israel on October 7th, 1,200 people were killed on that day. In struggle for their national rights, they use legitimate means. They target military and security institutions, but they have never treated people of Turkey, the aspirations of the Palestinian people by Italians, and rendering their claim to and national aspirations to be illegitimate. The world similarly to both movements is critically different. I think that the Kurds now have to differentiate themselves from Hamas's terrorist tactics and appeal to rights. They can do that by things are Hamas. Goals of Hamas in Turkey and in Syria may be the same. This is an inflection moment, continues more effectively.
Thank you, Ali. I wanted to ask these regimes in the Middle East, especially these regimes of Kurdish minority populations, but minority populations that have authoritarian rule, what consequences could they if they don't change their policies? I think you're muted, Mr. Taha.
Sorry, my mic was not working. It's okay?
Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay. Let me first to say that the Kurdish issue in the Middle East were created by two factors. First of all, the West who created a problem when they divided the Kurdish area among four countries between Iran, Syria, Iraq, and Turkey. And historically, they refused to support the right of Kurds between 18 to 19 and 12 to 20. The last 3 decades, I didn't see I didn't read something about any Western support for the Kurdish right. And we have a look on Lausanne comparing it to the even severe, that you can see that it gives the Kurdish a little bit of rights. They give them a little bit of rights. It didn't give them a right to establish a political entity for their for identity but de facto that created after the War of Liberation 2023, I think Mustafa Kemal Ataturk played as on de facto basis that although the Kurdish contribution of this War of Liberation, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk refused to give them any kind of their cultural rights. On the other side, Iran. Sorry.
Continue.
Yes,
I'll add a thought when you finish.
I'm sorry. The practice of the regime since the first half of 20th century, all of their policies created the problem of identity of the Kurdish, not also Kurdish, all minorities in the Middle East problems were created because of policies of the regime. But we don't have to forget the main actors who are the Western power who divided the areas of Kurdish. This is the first observation. Second one, there is some dictatorship and authoritarian regime in the Middle East. Don't forget that all of these regimes are supported by the Western powers. For example, Erdogan is a main member of the NATO. We don't have to forget this point. And many stations in the Kurdish history, we can find that pretend, for example, to support the Iraqi government against the Barzani revolution and the kind of uprising by the Kurdish the Kurdish area issue is created by both policies of the regimes in which are created Western power and the Western power by dividing the Kurdish areas among 4 countries. Let me go back to some words said by Mr. Philips. He said about that the common things shared between our Kurds and the West are the common values. Let me have a different view of this. Most of the United States policies in the Middle East are just centered around its interests, not values. We can have a look on what is happening on Palestinian territories. You mentioned that Hamas movement killed, you think 1,200 or 1,400 persons from Israeli, but don't forget all of kinds of violating international law by the Israeli troops and the absolute support by United States to Israel, both diplomatically in the Middle East and the Security Council and the United Nations, or militarily by, you can find some two biggest, the biggest two aircraft carriers in the Middle East arrived in the Middle East in the last month, and even the nuclear submarine in the Middle East also. I think this absolute support for the Israeli violation of the Middle East and the humanity in Israel, not in Israel, but in Lebanon also, in Syria also, I think this kind of violating the announced values between the announced values by the Americans. So there is no common values between West and the Kurds. Kurds, they are fighting to restore their cultural rights. They have a right, but United States existence in the Middle East is not legal, just for their interest. This is the point that I want to make to reply on commenting on the Mr. Philips' words. But for the authoritarian regimes, I think the authoritarian regimes nowadays are afraid. They are afraid of what is happening on the round of, because their future will be determined according the result of what's happening in the Middle East. For example, for Jordan can agree with you that Hamas.
Sorry, Mr. Ahmed, if it's okay, I'd like to also get Mr.
Let me see authoritarian regimes that but the main reason, it is the main reason for creating the problems of the
Mr. Ali Ahmed.
Kurds.
Sorry.
Yep.
Thank you. If I'd like to get Mr. Othman's view on this question as well, just so we have time for every question.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Othman, the floor is yours. What will these regimes face in terms of consequences if they don't change their policies?
Thank you for hosting me on this important discussion. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I think I would like to go back one step, just a brief comment on David's assessment of the relationship between the Kurds and the United States I agree. I mean, the Kurds in the region generally share the same world vision as the United States or as the West in terms of wanting to establish a non-violent, democratic, you name it, systems in the region, modes of governance, despite all the shortcomings that exist in the area. But one key thing I think the Kurds should be mindful of, that the United States, neither the United States nor any of their other military allies, basically in Europe or in the Western world, it doesn't seem that they do have a Kurdish policy independent from the policies that they have towards the various countries that the Kurds live in. For example, in Iraqi Kurdistan, America wants the Kurds of Iraq to be good Iraqis. In Turkey, it's very clear. They want them to be good Turks or good Turkish citizens. In Iran, it's the same. Despite everything that's happening between the Iranian regime and the United States of America, we are still not seeing any relationship to be mentioned or to be worthy of mentioning between the United States government and the Iranian Kurds, who are the opposition to the existing regime in Tehran. So the same thing with Syria. The situation because of ISIS, the United States had some connections or has some connections with the Syrian Kurds, the SDF, but they are extremely careful in describing it as a transactional relationship and not a strategic one. So for this, the Kurds in various parts of Kurdistan should be mindful of the way that they are being looked at or they are being treated. And the example of Trump and Erdogan that you mentioned was very clear. And as our maybe wishful thinking in various stages of our history, we have seen these many betrayals that David mentioned over the history in various parts of Kurdistan. Now, coming to the various regimes in the region or the various governments, it is very clear that you cannot have stability in any country unless you have solved the Kurdish issue, because it will of all Kurds. You cannot have them to change their identities. You cannot annihilate them. Saddam tried very hard to look at the results. The Kurdish so far. In Iraq, things are on path, but again, there are still issues, but it is happening within constitutional frameworks, within some structures. Political Kurds are part of the governing of the country. They still have many issues over the philosophy, their philosophy of the future of their relationship. What's the vision for the country? Do we want a central? Do we want a federal country? There are still the differences between the various visions. But the bottom line is politics has the upper hand in Iraq. We had some episodes after the referendum where we had military conflict, but generally the situation is political. But in all other parts of the region in Kurdistan, Iran, Turkey, or Syria, if it is up to these regimes, they would want to end any existence or presence of the Kurds in these areas, and this is something impossible. So at one possible, I think, extremely important role for the allies of the Kurds, or let's not call them allies, let's say friends, or maybe less than friends, people who see the Kurds are people who are putting on peaceful settlements of the Kurdish issues in the various areas. I mean, Turkey is one good example of this. I'll come 1 minute, David. I'll just finish this thought. Turkey is a strong ally of the United States. their alliance with the United States is much more stronger than any Kurd in the region with the United States, despite the movement of terrorists for else. But the United States is still looking at this conflict and doesn't want to have anything to do with this internal conflict. And if the Kurdish issue, for example, in Turkey or in Syria, is settled and solved, even and also in Iraq, it is to the benefit of the United States. But we are not seeing this at all. Sorry, David.
One thing that Kurds agree on is they no longer aspire to the creation of a greater Kurdistan. They all
Absolutely.
support the right to self-determination. But self-determination in international law doesn't necessarily mean breaking up nations' pale. Self-determination can involve different forms of decentralization and the states. The best mechanism for this, and all four countries, if the U.S. wants to advance its own interests on sovereignty and advancing Kurdish and at the same time advancing U.S. goals in the region, which are stability, democracy, and human rights.
Please write this in an op-ed in the Washington Post or the New York Times.
I haven't written it yet, have you?
I haven't. You should write that. They don't listen to the Kurds, they listen to the Americans.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. If it's okay with everyone, I'm going to move on to the second topic. We want to talk about the Turkish policy towards Syria right now, especially because we saw recent significant Turkish airstrikes at the beginning of October against mostly civilian infrastructure in north and east Syria. And at the same time, we saw President Erdogan criticizing its campaign in Gaza, while at the same time in targets in north and east Syria. So, Mr.
Sorry,
Osman,
just...
I wanted to ask you, where is Turkish policy heading in dealing with the situation in Syria? What can we expect in the near future?
Well, looking at events and the way in Syria, it will only get worse if he is not stopped. If he is not by his allies or by his friends in the West. The situation or the relationship with Erdogan is that you do the bottom line in return for you doing whatever you want with Syria and with the Kurds, and also, of course, internally. So the prognosis, I believe, is very grim. There is nothing in sight, nothing in that's in the horizon that seems to have any impact on Erdogan, and he seems to have a completely, basically whatever he does with the Kurds, it's completely his business. This is how he sees it, and everyone else treats him this way, to the point that, as you mentioned, when a month ago he was bombing Rojava the same way as the Israelis are doing to Gaza today, and nobody said anything to him. And today he has the audacity to say that when you are in a war, you shouldn't hit civilian installations. So he seems to be extremely comfortable with that policy, and there doesn't seem to be any deterrence for him, neither from the West nor from the region in general. And on this issue, I see that even when it comes to the relationship between Iran and Turkey, and I mean, one of the they seem to be in full agreement, despite any differences that they may have. They are in full agreement, Iran, Turkey, Iraq, and up to a point the Syrian regime, over the Kurdish issue, that you do whatever you want, and nobody's going to question you for what you did. And this rule, this doctrine seems to apply to the relationship of Erdogan with the West. So he feels he has a free hand over the Kurds in all parts of Kurdistan.
The relations between the United States and Turkey are changing. Turkey's decision to spend $2.5 billion on a Russian surface-to-air missile system, the S-400, has been a matter of for the U.S. Congress to punish Turkey. It's banned Turkey from the F-35 stealth fighter program. It's prohibited the transfer that Turkey has. So there is an increasing clamor. Erdogan is, as indicated in the title of one certain ally, about Erdogan's approach. I have the honor of working with Richard Holbrooke, and he said of Slobodan Milosevic that he solves a problem by creating a. And I think the same thing can be said of Erdogan. He knows he has a problem domestically. The Turkish lira has plummeted. There is strong opposition to the AKP, particularly at the local government level. So Erdogan is creating a bigger problem by attacking Syria, by attacking Iraqi Kurdistan. We have to recognize that Erdogan is extremely calculating. He's also very skillful. But there should be no way that the U.S. countenances his aggression, Turkey's allies. And if the U.S. is sincere about their partnership with the Kurds, it needs to send a message and uphold Kurdish interests. You know, we certainly can't tolerate arbitrary and wanton attacks against Kurds in Syria.
You know, David, sorry, we're just taking over this, but all what you said about Congress trying to punish Turkey for taking part in the S-400 but this really doesn't mean anything on the ground. Do you remember last month or a bit more, whenever one drone was downed by the Americans because it got close to the American personnel or the areas where the American base was? If we had this situation repeated in various other parts, no drone should hit any civilian installation. And if the minute they hit the first water plant or water treatment plant, if they were hit, that would have been a much stronger message to Erdogan than telling him the F-16s or the F-35 or whatever warplanes that for futuristic deals. Erdogan deals with the region or behaves like a gangster, and he has to have the same language of response. When
Sorry,
a gangster,
Ali Ahmed's opinion on this as well, how he sees Turkish policy heading in with the situation in Syria.
Let me just agree with you briefly. Gangster. He needs to be punished, not just merely with words, but with actions from the United States.
Yep.
Mr. Taha.
For the Turkish policies in Syria and all over the Middle East, I project by the touristic and revive but anyway, there is a project for Turkey, Syria, but for the American relation, I think it's more than F-35 aircrafts and what between Turkish and American. There is a grand strategic relations. It is announced by the policy and the official and the Americans. There is a strategic and the broader frame of relations. So there is, I don't believe that there is a hostility and there is a problem between America and it's just a tactics on a small levels, but on the grand vision, weaknesses between US and Turkey. But for the policies, the Turkish policies in the Middle East, Erdogan after 12/11 revolution in Syria, he said it clearly. We should have the upper hand in Syria. We can go whatever we want and whenever we want. So many militias in Syria that resulted that Turkey occupied about more than 9,000 of kilometers of the Syrian lands, and its policy components. It contains displacing Kurds from their areas and fearing some demographic imbalancing for his business. I think also the Turkish project to Turkizing, or what we can say, it's to enforce the area to be under the Turkish identity, not Arab identity. Demographic change involving its amending its administrative area to the Turkish administration. It's governing its area, the Syrian land, the Turkish rules, by Turkish laws, and I think their people to be Turkish, to change their identity. That I can do, I want in Syria and whenever. As for the opponents, the question, is there any opponents, opposition, United States or any foreign? I don't think there is any opposition by Americans or Russians or even Iranians. They have a coordination on the Syrian land. So for this point, I can say there is a coordination, there is a project, there is no any common shared values between Americans and the Kurds, just it's matter of.
You famously said,
confirms that.
But the reason why the Kurds in Syria are treated so distrustfully by Assad and by Erdogan is because they are practicing for political transition.
I believe they will to have a federal one day.
That the
but they announced something like this in Iraq, but they didn't make anything like that.
So let's have strategic patience and see what happens in the near future. I'm confident that the U.S. will ultimately see things through a Kurdish prism and work more effectively to uphold Kurdish rights throughout
what is happening in
determination we think legitimate, and Palestinian rights, which for the people of Palestine is legitimate, but they are very poorly represented by a terror group like Hamas. The U.S. needs to see both.
Gentlemen, we don't want to get away from the point too much. And yeah, sorry, I just wanted to ask one more question.
Okay, I understand.
Because I know you got to run, Mr. Phillips. I wanted to ask you about the status of Abdullah Öcalan, and following in the footsteps of Nelson Mandela, fighting for democracy, peace, justice, women's freedom in the Middle East, that he finally be released as part of a peace process in the Middle East.
Yes, as part of a peace process and negotiations between Kurds and Turkey, Öcalan should be released. So that is a given. Until those negotiations happen and they're comprehensive and all of the issues are resolved, I don't foresee a day when Öcalan will be released. But we should work towards that goal. He's made it very clear that he supports peaceful resolution of the Kurdish question. He may not have practiced that in the past, but it's now the present, and we need to look at things as they are, not as they were. So if we support the Kurds in Turkey, we also need to support their political leaders. It means the leaders of the HDP should be released from jail as part of a amnesty and disarmament and demobilization.
And how could America potentially play a role as mediator between the Kurds and Turkey on this issue, especially?
So Turkey resists mediation. It says this is a domestic issue. It's an internal problem. The U.S. needs to use its power and influence to insert itself into the Kurdish question and make clear what kind of outcome we think is in the interests of all parties. Remember, we don't have anything against Turkey. We want Turkey to be a democratic ally. In order for that to happen, Turkey needs to reform itself. And that starts by releasing political prisoners, providing greater cultural rights and political rights, removing some of the legislation like Article 301 of the Penal Code, of Article 8 of the Anti-Terror Act, which are used to suppress freedom of expression. There's a lot of work to do in Turkey. I think the U.S. can help.
And Mr. Osman, how do you see the issue of Abdullah Öcalan's imprisonment right now? Same question to you.
Well, it's clearly a big humiliation and insult to every Kurd in the region. I mean, one of the most important leaders of the Kurds is being locked up, and they know very well, Turkey knows, and the United States link the Kurdish issue, that the key to making peace, real lasting peace with the Kurds is there's only one address for it, and that's Emrali and Mr. Öcalan. But they are clearly repeating the same, up to a point, Israeli mistake of looking for everyone else as an interlocutor for peace apart from Mr. Yasser Arafat. They looked for everyone and nobody was real, and you see what it is. So if there is really a will to have peace with the Kurds in Turkey and perhaps in other parts of of Kurdistan, or a healthy relationship between Turkey and the Kurds, Turkish states and the Kurds, Mr. Öcalan should be released because he is the interlocutor for peace, if there is a will to make peace. But there doesn't seem to be any will, and neither the United States nor other allies of Turkey are pushing in that direction. Now, just a follow-up from what you just asked, David, about how can the United States play a role in peace. I think step number one, to delist the PKK as a terrorist organization. They don't need Turkey to do that. They can just delist it. To Rojava, and it can flow. We can take it from there.
Can I say a word in conclusion, because I have to go to the airport and catch my flight?
Absolutely.
I just want to thank the Rojava Center for Security Studies for having this panel. It's been an interesting discussion with some interesting ideas on the way forward. I'd like to acknowledge Ms. Sinam Sherkani Mohammed, your DC representative, who does a very capable job of representing the Syrian Kurds here in Washington. And I also see that my friend Salih Muslim is attending the conference, and I just want to send him my regards and best wishes, as I send regards and best wishes to all of your guests. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much. Thank
Okay.
you, Mr. Phillips. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Have a safe flight.
Bye.
Thank you, David.
And Mr. Ali Ahmed, I wanted to get your opinion on the same issue. How do you see of what kind of role he can play, the importance of his release, peace, and a solution to the Kurdish issue, but also contributing to peace in the Middle East?
Anyway, for Mr. Abdallah Öcalan, I think vision to support the coexistence between peoples in the Middle East, he sees that there is he has his vision, the democratic nation, many times, and for his life he used to criticize the Western and capitalism, Western civilization and the capitalism. I think this is one of the main reasons behind the conspiracy to arrest him and receiving him to Emirates, as a result of his very deep criticizing to the Western exploitation values and policies. But for his vision, I think it's very nice to support coexistence between peoples in the Middle East. But the main point is here, this vision should be approved by the parties of the problems. For example, let's have a look on the what's happening in the conflict between and Israel. Does Israel accept the vision of Abdallah Öcalan to have an environment and of coexistence between people? The Israelis refuse and reject the existence of Palestinians radically.
Sorry, if everyone could mute their microphones. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Taha.
For the Israeli part, I don't think in any other vision that they can live together with the Palestinians. They refuse any kind of coexistence between. For the Turkish also, I can say that the Turkish, whatever his Mr. Abdallah Öcalan's vision to support the coexistence between peoples, but the regime, the authoritarian regime that is ruling Turkey, I think from its establishing in 1923, they don't believe that there has to be exist. The Turkish identity should be the control. They don't believe that the Kurdish has rights. The main condition to put Mr. Abdallah Öcalan's vision on ground to implement it, I think the two parts, they have to accept each other. For the Turkish, if you go back to history of the relations in the 19th, 20th century, after the independence and the announcement of the Turkish state, all policies by the Turkish government, they don't support any kind of Kurdish rights. The same is on Palestinian land. We should accept the dialogue with the Israel. The mind of says that this land is just for us. The similar like what is the case of Iran. There is no for Kurdish in this land. I mean Kurdish identity. In Turkey also, the first constitution put on 1923 says that all inhabitants of the Kurdish of Turkish land should be Turks. the Turkish mentality should respect the cultural rights of the Kurdish. I think this is the main point. We should have changed. We should change the minds of musicians to accept Kurdish, to put up the decision makers toward the right of Kurdish. But now it is matter of politics, not culture. Since the establishment of the Turkish, the nationalist wing ruling the Turkish state, they are the main actor in this equity. I think it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to convince the Turkish people that Mr. Abdullah Öcalan has a good vision. For me, I believe that is a good vision, but the main factor is the authorities, both in Turkey and Iran and even Israel.
Thank you very much. Moving on to another topic, we've seen the Turkish state support and even export various jihadist groups, mostly Syrian jihadist groups that were defeated largely by the regime, were kind of adopted by the Turkish state for use as a proxy force. And we've seen them deploy them against the SDF in Syria. We've seen them deployed in Libya on behalf of Turkish interests. And we've even seen them appear in Nagorno-Karabakh in support of Azerbaijan's actions against Armenian forces. This large-scale support on the part of the Turkish state for jihadist groups and for extremist factions, could it potentially cause some kind of reconsideration of the international community's position towards the Turkish state? Could it lead to Turkey's Western partners reconsidering their relationships with the Turkish state? First for Mr. Osman.
Yeah, well, Erdogan's support for these militants and for ISIS, actually, doesn't directly. Remember when ISIS took over Mosul, the employees of the Turkish consulate, they just left very easily. And if you were to, at the height of ISIS, if you were to bring a map of the Middle East and look at the countries and regions where Erdogan had a problem with and mark them, and juxtapose that with another map of the Middle East, of the areas where ISIS was active, you would see exactly the same. It didn't take much to see that ISIS was practically the military wing of in the region. And very good examples. ISIS was not active in Iran. And these are the two countries where Erdogan didn't have a problem with. Kurdistan of Iraq, Kurdistan of Syria, Iraq, everywhere else, Egypt, Libya, at some point, wherever the problem with Erdogan, you would find an operation or activities of ISIS very bluntly and openly. So the West has known from the start, but why they are not acting? Because Erdogan, as I said, he's like the gangster. He's holding one thing and pressuring them with other things at the same time. He tries to make the deals with the West, but at the same time, he's enjoying the freedom of oppressing the Kurds, doing whatever he wants, suppress freedom of expression inside his country, support jihadists, support terrorist groups, completely bomb civilians in the region, in Syria and in the mountainous regions of Iraqi Kurdistan, without anybody telling him anything. So he behaves like a spoiled child in the area. And I don't think the West will change their attitude dramatically or drastically for this point, because this is a well-known fact to everybody. Everybody knows this. Here, I think I have to mention, or just to, one
Yes.
thing that's very important, I think, that we have to mention about the Kurds in the region. And the video is not there. I think it's fine, right?
Yeah, I could still hear you. Okay, it's no problem.
You can still hear me. One of the key things I think today is for the Kurds to ask themselves this very important question. Kurds in all parts of Kurdistan, what is the relationship that we are having with those allies or pseudo-allies, people like the United States, the West, the Europeans in general? What are we getting in return for this? Or are we doing the right thing? I mean, look at the SDF lost 11,000 people in its fight against ISIS, in return for 7 or 8 or 10 Americans killed in the war. Now, if 11,000 lives are not enough to change the American perception towards the Kurds and see them as allies and not transactional partnership, what would change that? And the Kurds, if I were in place of the Kurdish leadership, it is a very tough decision to make, difficult, but at the same time, I would ask myself the important questions. What are we doing with the United States and the others? If after
Mr. Ali Ahmed, the same question to you. Do you think that Turkey's support for extremist groups and even deploying them to other combat zones and using them as a proxy, really, for Turkish state policy could lead to the international community changing their position and approach to relations with the Turkish state?
I think it's not the first time that Turkey supports the terrorist group in the Middle East. They use them to for their business in Libya and Syria. It is good. It is a part of the Syrian of the Turkish behavior historically. Even in the during the Ottoman Empire's duration, I think this behavior is well known in the history. Proxy is part of the Turkish policy, but the pragmatic feature of the policies, the pragmatic feature of the Turkish policies under President Erdogan is known also. Erdogan says that the terrorist groups in Syria are terrorists, but in Libya they are allies. It's Iraq and his government, if you remember. I think this behavior is one aspect of the pragmatic policies by the Turkish President Erdogan. Erdogan exploited the terrorist group in in Iraq to have the Iraqi oil from through transforming Iraqi oil into Europe. When ISIS captured, I think it was in 2012. I think when the under the ISIS capture of the Iraqi lands, he supported them to transfer the oil from Iraq to Europe also. But it's not matter of Turkey only. Hillary Clinton one day said in her book, hard choices, that we supported Al Qaeda in Afghanistan against the USSR. It's not new in international policy. That's why we can understand the terrorist group are well known as a tool to the regional powers, both Iran. If we look at Houthis and Hezbollah in Syria, and the militias backed by Turkey and even Al Qaeda when it was supported by Americans. It is not new in international politics. So I agree with you that it is well known that it is, and the Turkish also, many Turkish officials said that yes, we support militias in Syria. Terrorists in camps in Syria said that we came here under the umbrella and the supervision of the Turkish authorities. But let me go back to the good question said by Mr. Forgive me, I don't remember his name. You said very important question. What is doing now by the Turks with the Western power, not the American only? What you are doing, is it on the right now or no? Let me come you to history. We will find that the Kurds play an important role in many steps, in many stations when they participated in the war and liberation of Turkey from 1920 until 1923. They participated and they contributed in the war of liberation. They had a dream. They were dreaming to have a right. One day in 1521, I think 1521, when it was Emperor Suleiman used some Kurdish troops in his empire extension. That what I want to say that we have to be realistic. What are doing with the Americans are really serious. I don't think we have to be more aware of this answer. The Americans and Western power care just of their interests, not the right of Kurds. If they care the right of Kurds, I think they will support the Kurdish rights in the beginning of this century, when they deprived of their rights for the sake of for the interest of Iran, Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. If you remember in Barzani revolution, the West supported Iraqi government against Barzani's revolution. Do you believe and do Kurds believe that Americans are serious to support their rights, or it is just tactics? They support these policies, American policies, and the American alliance between Kurds and with the Kurds. Is it strategic or it is tactics? From reading the history of the powers of the Western power practices in the Middle East, I see that it is sure the Western power will never let the Kurdish take their rights, or we will find a support for the Kurdish people against the Turkish violation all time. So we have to be more aware of this grand vision. It's just a matter of reshaping the Middle East after what is happening in the Middle East now. I think the world order is being changed after 100 years after the 1917. Now the world order and the regional order is being changed. This equation, the Kurds should read it well. We should have a good place on the undergoing preparation of the process of reshaping the Middle East. I don't believe that Americans will help us seriously. I think it's matter for me. If you ask me for a solution, I think the consolidations and rapprochement with the Arabs and the whole peoples of the Middle East, because we are belonging to the same area. I think you will never find a good help from the West. You can find it from your brothers, Arabs, and other people in the Middle East. And I hope so.
So
I'm not
you
saying,
mentioned,
but I can read the history. The history says that we have a good experience in coexistence. If you laughing. I know. I understand your smile. That
Our Arab brothers watched us being massacred by Saddam
my
Hussein.
friend, it's not my friend. It's a matter
You
of
mentioned-
ruling regimes. I'm speaking about the people, not regimes. The authoritarian regimes are manufactured by the Western power.
Mr. Taha,
It
you
wa-
mentioned the war.
Excuse me, just one moment.
Can I just comment very quickly?
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Osman, yes.
Taha, thank you very much for your vision and for your words. But one reservation, serious reservation about our brothers, the nations in the Middle East, especially the Arabs. I mean, a month before Gaza, a similar style of bombing took place in Rojava. And all our brothers in the Middle East, they have social, they have Twitter, they have Facebook, the same way as they are now. We can see all the outcry for what's happening in Gaza. We have not heard a single voice in condemnation of what Erdogan was doing in northeast Syria, in Rojava. We sometimes, Iraqi Kurds say, okay, during Anfal, the media was blocked and everything else, and people didn't know about it. It was the regimes. But today, the pictures of their bombs were being produced to everybody. We have not heard anything. And perhaps this could be one of the reasons, Mr. Taha, that some of our Arab friends say, why isn't the Kurdish loud and aggressive against Israel for what's happening today in Gaza? The answer is 1 month before this. The same thing happened to them, and nobody said a word. Neither the Palestinians, neither
my
the
friend,
others.
let me.
Sorry.
Excuse me. I have to.
Sorry.
I can hear you.
I studied the problem of minorities in the Middle East. Into my master's degree.
Sorry.
My master's
Mr. Elî Taha,
Excuse
we
me.
have to move on to the next question. We don't have time.
While you answer the next question, you can
The next
whatever you
question.
want to say.
Into what we're war escalating in Gaza, we're seeing kind of general like escalation around the Middle East. Everything seems very interconnected with the different actors, and we're seeing potentially things start to spread here in Syria and in Iraq, the Kurdish areas, and we're seeing increasing attacks here in Syria and Iraq as well. What are the overall implications of this wider expansion of conflict for North and East Syria specifically? And first, I'd like to hear from Mr. Osman and then from Mr. Elî Taha.
Well, the big elephant in the room when it comes to the conflict in the Middle East is Iran. We have to see what's going to happen with Iran and all the to this minute, America is not convinced that they should go after Iran for this. It is the opposite. Iran is by these various attacks on Harir here in the airport, on Ain al-Assad, in other areas in Deir ez-Zor and in Syria. All those who conduct these attacks are pro-Iranian elements in the region. The Houthis and you name it. But there doesn't to be a decision, neither by Iran nor by the United States, to direct confrontation. Now, for the Kurds, both in Iraq and in Syria, their only option is to just stay put and do nothing. Just watch what's happening. Don't take sides, neither in America nor in Iran. They took sides in the past in the war against ISIS with the hope that they get something. Although, I mean, the war against ISIS, it wasn't the matter of taking this side or the other. It was a fight that it was a vital war for all people in the Middle East, and the Kurds were at the forefront of it. But it was at the expense of them being seen as strong American allies and being looked at as American tools in the region. And on the other hand, you have the militias that, or for the people in the area, is to stay put and watch what's happening. If there is a decision by the United States to attack the Iranian regime, then so be it. It's their problem, really. It shouldn't be the Kurds' problem, or the Kurds have no, basically, we have no dog in this fight. We shouldn't have much. Playing the balancing game is the key issue, trying to preserve the area. The only guarantee, I would say, that the Kurds should seek, and here, when I say the Kurds, in both sides, Iran, in Syria and in Iraq, is to be protected from Erdogan. If there is a spillover of the war to this part, to where we live now, Turkey will use the vacuum. Turkey will use it to attack various areas in the name of whatever thing that they come up with, fighting terrorism, you name it. So the Kurds, or the key priority I Kurds, is to create the right mechanisms to protect their areas from another attack of Erdogan.
The coming wave is very serious and deep in the changing Middle East. I think they will be in face of the Turkish attack. I agree with you, and not only the Turks, and also have a coalition with the Turkish against any kind of movement by the wave. This wave of change in the Middle East is more deep comparing to, if you come back to 1973, when it was the war between Egypt and Israel defeated by the Egyptian army. But if you imagine with me the intervention, you will find aircraft carriers and nuclear existence in the Middle East. Why? I don't think because they are supporting Israel, because they are protecting the new shape or the current shape of the Middle East, because of there's other actors are emergent power in the Middle East, like Russia, China. Chinese presidents make very important summit with the leaders of the Middle East and Arab, Islamic, and even African leaders in December 2020. After 2 weeks, President Biden make another summit with the African people. I think this is a competition between the great powers in the Middle East. That's why this American intervention is very, very, very heavy this time. That's why I advise, I agree with you to recommend Kurds not to take any side. Believe that that taking the American side will help you in the future. This action, I think it will put you in the face of Kurdish and the Iranian attack, like what happened many times in the history. I agree with you.
Moving on to a similar topic, Mr. Osman, I wanted to ask, with this increased religious, nationalist, even racial thinking that's taking place in the Middle East right now, to what extent do you believe that the democratic nation project that is being implemented here in North and East Syria can be a solution to limit the rise of these, we can say, malicious actors in the Middle East?
Well, any system of governance should really be the choice of the people. And in the areas of the Middle East where we are seeing the rise of extremism and radicalism, we see the absence of democracy and or the absence of good governance, let's say. So it is very difficult to see how successful any model in the Middle East and its implementation in other parts without really knowing the will of the people through the ballot box. We cannot tell, again, I mean, even looking at the democratic nations project that is now being implemented in northeast Syria, it has its problems as well, but that's partly because of the abnormal circumstances that northeast Syria is going through. A war with ISIS, a war with Erdogan, attacks by Erdogan, regime, a dysfunctional or even a blockade by the regime against the region, a non or dysfunctional relationship with its other Kurdish neighbor. So it's not the best circumstances to assess the success or the failure of a governance project or a governance idea, let alone having or thinking of it to be spread into other parts of the Middle East or in of the region in general.
So I have one more question for each of our guests before we move on to just brief closing remarks. First, Mr. Elî Taha, I wanted to ask, in your view, in your experience, and any conversations you've had, how do you find that Arabs, the Arab people living in North and East Syria, see the autonomous project in North and East Syria? Oh,
Can you repeat? If you
I can hear you now. Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, no problem. I was just asking you, how do Arabs, both within Syria but also outside of Syria, how do they see the autonomous administration in the North and East?
Yeah.
Of
You're
the
asking me
country
about you're asking me about the public opinion, the Arab public opinion toward the autonomous of Kurdish. Is it okay?
Yes. Yes.
I think the perception, the Arab perception toward the Kurdish in general, and especially for this point, I think it is affected by the Turkish media, led by the Islamic movement in the Arab world, that support them to spread an image that there is the Kurdish are very the Kurds creating the Arab countries, the Turkish context says that the Kurdish are very serious threatened, and they don't believe that is useful for their lands. That's why, but I think this is because the control of the Islamic trend in the Middle East and Arab countries, especially over the public space. This is, we should have understand this. If you go to European environment, you will find a pro-Jewish context because of the media. In the Arab world, you will find a media supporting the Turkish story. That's why you can find that you can meet an Arab person says that the Kurdish are very serious, the Kurdish are threatening us, the Kurdish are separatists. I think this is a cultural point. We have to, we are now in the issues. For me, myself, I have 2 books in this point to contribute in changing this mentality. I think I agree with you that there is some problems in the Arab perception toward the Kurdish issue, but it's because of two elements: the nationalist and authoritarian regimes ruling the area since 1950s, and the pro-Turkish media context in the Middle East because of the Islamic trends. But the reality, you will find our history is rich of coexistence and cooperation between the Arab and the Kurdish. And recently, I wrote an article about the coexistence between Arab and the Kurdish since the Pharaohs and the Islamic period. The reality that we are coexisted actually, but because of what has happened in the recent 6 decades after what is the so-called independence in Egypt, in Syria, in Iraq, and even in North Africa, the nationalistic policies, the extreme nationalistic context toward the issues of minorities, not of the Kurdish only. The Amazigh in North Africa, the Druze also, Dorsis people, and the Ashur Syrian, all of minorities are against the Arab unity. This is the main idea of the nationalist conquest since the six past decades. This is the main reason. If you will find a different point of view coming from the Arab world because of these two elements: the pro-Turkish Islamic conquest and the extreme pro-ruling regimes of nationalistic movements since the mid.
And Mr. Othman, how do you what final evaluations do you have towards the general Western and Arab positions towards not just the Kurdish issue in general, but the autonomous administration specifically?
Could you repeat the questions, please? I couldn't hear you properly.
Yes, my apologies. How do you have any final evaluations to make on both the Western and Arab positions towards the Kurdish issue in general, but especially towards the autonomous administration?
Well, it's looking at the autonomous administration in northeast Syria, it seems to be the victim of the Arab relationship and the Western relationship with Turkey. Turkey, as I said, behaves like a bully in the Middle East, and it is clearly tolerated by the Arabs and by the West generally. We haven't seen any serious actions taken against Turkey for its policy towards the Kurds in general, and especially towards northeast Syria. Especially after their fight with ISIS, after everything that they have been standing for, after all their calls for normalization, at least with the northern neighbor. But Turkey seems to be calling the shots today, and neither the Arabs nor the West in general are able to stop Turkey. So in a way, and the main party that is disadvantaged in this position is the autonomous administration of Northeast. So again, I go back to my initial thought, or somewhere that I said, the Kurds or the autonomous administration need to seriously think about their position or their relationship with the West, although they might not have much of a choice at certain part, but at least they should not be seen as proxies of the United States in the region.
Thank you very much. And before we wrap up, I just want to ask both of you if you have any final remarks. Mr. Othman, since you were just speaking, you can start first, and after this, I'll ask Mr. Elî Taha. Let's try to keep it shorter, but also don't rush, of course. Thank you.
Well, I think we said everything that can be said. All I can say is that in these tough times and in this tough neighborhood that we live in, Kurds should always be thinking and be creative about what alternatives do they have, what options do they have. And the key issue for the Kurds in all parts of Kurdistan is not to be victims of slogans like what happened with our Palestinian friends in the region. Being practical in politics and in this tough neighborhood and in these tough times, I think is the key to survival at this period or day and age. It's very difficult to be ideological about certain positions at a time when practically everybody is practicing realpolitik around you.
For me, let me mention,
Mr. Elî Taha.
For me, let me mention some final remarks. First of all, thank you very much for being with you today. It's very, very nice experience, and I hope it will not be the last one. We have to continue, and we have to make more brainstorming. The Kurdish issue, I think, and I touched this point, is spreading around the Middle East. In my country, in Egypt, we can find events many times. Tomorrow, for example, I'm participating. I will participate in some event on the Kurdish issue. The people of the Arab world nowadays are being more aware of the Kurdish issue. The nation, democratic nation by the Mr. Abdullah Öcalan is also being more popular and more famous in the Arab world. Me, myself, recently I wrote many articles and studies about the democratic nations and its political, economic, and social perspectives. And as a part of the Arab initiative for releasing Abdullah Öcalan, we are making brainstorming like this every month or two times every month. What I want to say is that nowadays there is a time of changing minds. We have to be more efforts to change minds towards the great issues in our regional area. Like the Kurdish area, the Kurdish problem. I'm optimistic. I have a hope, and I think tomorrow will be better in this point because the nations are being more aware of this because of globalization and social media. It is a very important point because nowadays we are talking about a Kurdish problem. Before we could not do something like this, and in a changing Middle East, I think that Kurdish people should be more aware of the logic and the strategic object of the Western power. We should learn from the lessons of the past. The West will never let you to have your rights because of it is their historical practices. And finally, thank you very much, and I hope we repeat such events because the democratic nation vision, I think it needs to be more spread in the Arab world. Mr. Abdullah Öcalan has many ideas related to the great problems in the Arab world, like economic crisis, Palestinian crisis, and even the position in the women in the Middle East. I think he covered many problems. I think we should have a session like this to study his ideas. And finally, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Elî Taha. Would any guests like to ask any last-minute questions? I see we have one question. Mr. Othman, can you see the question or would you like me to read it? Never mind. It's not so much a question as much as an agreement. Do any guests have any questions before we wrap up?
I think we said everything.
It seems that way. It certainly seems that way. Okay, well, if nobody has any questions,
I think I want to see everything. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. I want to thank everyone. I guess we might have something.
Samsung SM N975A has one what? Question or a comment?
Let's see that.
Go ahead, Samsung.
Thank you for this webinar. The points to make about the size. I think this is a comment for you, Mr. Osman.
Yes, I believe the question is currently being written. I assume.
How long will the
I will
Kurdish
just read
issues
it.
remain dependent on international interests? And what are the solutions, in your opinion? Wow. How long will the Kurdish issue remain dependent on international interests? Is forever. Everything in the region will remain dependent on international interests. I think the key issue here is for the Kurds in the region. First of all, the key thing for all Kurds is to be, I wouldn't say, let's say, united under one umbrella and one party on everything, but at least not to work against each other. And they could have enough clout to help each other out, or at least not to be against each other. This is one issue. Second issue, or this, where possible, when practical, is to always say and talk and be louder about wanting a peaceful settlement in the region. One of the key things that the Kurds do not seem to be very good at is making their point to the world media and change the perception that countries like Turkey, just like what Mr. Taha said, they are still Arab media, for example, is still very much affected. Turkish media is more powerful and stronger than Kurdish media. How are they doing this? The Turkish lobby in DC, the Turkish lobby in the West is much stronger than the Kurdish lobby. How do we change this? These are the things where the Kurds need to seriously ask themselves these questions. Turkey is not going to wake up, Erdogan will not wake up tomorrow and say, okay, I'm going to solve the Kurdish issue. What should the Arab countries do in order to resolve the Kurdish issue and other issues in the region in order to reach lasting peace and real stability that serves the interests of the people here? I think the Kurds in the Middle East live in two Arab countries, some of them. We have Syria and you have Iraq. In Iraq, things seem to be on track. Sorry, is this question for me or for Taha? Sorry.
I think the
sorry,
second
Mr.
one
Taha.
is for Mr. Taha.
Sorry, Mr. Taha.
No,
I just saw
no
your name
problem.
at the top.
No problem. I think it's a general question. You can answer also, and be for this point, I can let you read well the experience of what's happening on the Palestinian lands. What is the response by the Arab regimes for the Palestinians to this problem? No serious situation comes from the Arab regimes. That's why I can see I'm not aware toward the post Palestinian and the Kurdish problems. That's why I see that is a problem of peoples, we have to go in a way that I'm completely convinced that we have to change minds toward the right of people. It's a matter of culture. We have to change our minds toward toward this problem. Regimes, Arab regimes, they are watching what's happening in North Syria, the Syrian population, the Israeli violation toward the Israeli to Palestinians. There is no response from the Arab regimes. That's why I think it's a matter of they have changed their minds toward to be more active in this problem, to be a serious number in this equation. It is not possible, but I think it is not possible, but it is difficult, but it is not possible. Webinars, events like what's doing now, I think it may contribute to change minds, to convince the Arab people that they are brothers for the Kurds, to convince the people that the main crime, this problem, it was by the nationalist trend in the governing the Arab world, not the people, like the Western will one day, and I don't think they will one day. I don't think there will be an Arab regime take a serious response against the Western policies and the Turkish, and try to solve the Kurdish problem of us as a peoples, as a thinkers, as an intellectuals. We have to increase our meetings, our webinars, our interactions to convince people that we are together, not against us. We are not against each other. We are in the main area. We should have one. We have to be one hand against any exploitation, Turkey and all and other powers in the Middle East.
That feels like a great place to end it, actually. Thank you very much, Mr. Elî Taha. Thank you, Mr. Osman. Thank you to all our attendants to the event. It was a pleasure hosting it. As for any technical difficulty, Mr. Elî Taha said it's absolutely essential in building relations. So
yeah. If you the friend who wrote this question, let me ask you to read.
If it's not a problem for you, feel free to answer it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Let me ask you to read the history. You will find good points and delightful points and very rich experience of the coexistence between Arab and the Kurds and all of the people in the Middle East. I think you will find that there is a hope away from the politics on the level of people. I don't think there is a problem, but just to convince that we are supporting each other, not against each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone else. Everyone have a good day.